Hi guys, Rick Bradbury here and welcome to video 25 for the series of tutorial videos for the Canon 500D, T1i and KissX3. We're going to be looking at the autofocus system of the camera in this video in preparation for some upcoming videos like shooting in low light, shooting sports or action, and also taking portraits as well. So there's a few things that I want to cover. So we'll have a look at the autofocus system of the Canon 500D T1i and KissX3 now. Okay, so the autofocus points and the autofocus system on the 500D T1i and KissX3. Here it is. This camera has 9 autofocus points, one of which is a cross-type f2.8 sensitive. That's the one that's right in the middle. So as you look through your viewfinder, that is the point where you can hear it beeping there, is the one that's right in the middle of the viewfinder. You'll also see it as you bring the AF point selection up on the rear LCD as well. Now the outer points are not quite as sensitive as that centre AF point. They are f5.6 sensitive, and they're also not cross-type. They only work on the vertical plane, whereas the cross-type sensor works on a double axis, so it's slightly more sensitive. Now where you might find those outer points start to struggle to lock focus is in low light, in which case you might need to switch to that centre autofocus point to obtain a lock focus. That said, the centre AF point isn't necessarily in the best place for you, because it means you've got to put what you're focusing on dead centre in the frame through your viewfinder, which is why as you lock focus, confirm focus lock and then shift to recompose, and then you can take your shot. I will do a further video on focus recompose because there are a couple of things you need to watch out for when doing that. That'll be the one that's coming up next. So what we'll do, we'll take a closer look at the autofocus system on this camera and what's available in the certain modes in respect of selecting an AF point, and whether the camera's going to say, no, I'm taking control, I'm going to select the AF point that I want to use, or use all of them, and which modes will allow us creative control to use the autofocus points that we want, so we can lock focus on our chosen point of the frame or chosen subject to make the images that we want. So we'll take a look at that now. Okay, so here we are looking at the back of the 500D. Who remembers this view? So we're in full auto mode at the moment. Remember, we're looking at the autofocus system. So in fully auto mode, the camera basically chooses the autofocus point that you're going to use for you. Now if I try to change the autofocus point, this function is not currently available in this shooting mode, or the function is not selectable in the current shooting mode. So I have no control over this. Now the camera is going to activate all the autofocus points, okay, and it will choose which ones to use to lock onto the subject. Now typically the camera is going to want to lock onto the subject which is actually closest to the camera. So say if my hand here is the closest thing and another hand behind, further away, it's going to favour locking onto the hand or the subject which is at the front of the frame. Now that might not be what you want. You might actually want to focus on something beyond what's in the foreground. And this is where the automatic modes kind of trip up really, because you can't select the autofocus point you want to use. You may be able to take the shot a few times and get it to refocus, and it might eventually choose the point or lock onto the subject that you want. But the best thing to do is come out of automatic modes and then choose modes that allows you to select the AF points. I have actually got a video already done on how to select the autofocus points. I'll cover it again here, but I'll stick that in the annotation and in the description as well. So we'll go on to the next mode. Okay, creative auto. There you go. Now again, we can't select the autofocus point that we want to use in that mode. I mean, I don't really use these modes, to be honest with you. I'm surprised that that mode's actually still in DSLRs these days, including the high-end ones. And we go on to program mode. Now on program mode we actually can select the autofocus point. Now you will see this formation of autofocus points through the viewfinder as little red dots and squares which are overlaid on the mirror or the screen. So we can now actually, by pressing the top right button here, select which autofocus point that we want to use. Now remember, as I said at the beginning of the video, this center one is the most sensitive to f2.8. All of the remaining ones, so this one, here, around the outside are all f5.6 and they are not cross type. So that center one, you can just press set to get to that quickly, is the cross type or most sensitive autofocus point, and the others are not. So if you find that these autofocus points on the outside are starting to hunt where the lens, I'll turn autofocus on, won't actually focus, you can hear it there hunting. Okay, maybe it could be because the light's not sufficient or there's not enough contrast, I'll cover that in a moment. Then best thing to do will be to switch to the center autofocus point. Now in this situation the camera's going to hunt actually, even on that point, because there's no contrast. This wall is a plain wall back here. There's no contrast, it's all one colour. So you get this with a white wall. Any scene that has no contrast, so there's no change from highlight to shadow. You can see highlight here on my arm, shadow underneath, so it's that change of highlight to shadow or detail that the camera needs to lock onto. So if I place my hand there, okay, I mean in this light, it's going to lock fine. Okay, as would any of the other points also as well, because there is enough light. If we're in low light, then the camera is going to struggle, and you might need to go to the center autofocus point, or in some situations maybe even do manual focus. So looking at the other modes, in time value or shutter priority, we can still choose the autofocus point that we want to use, just like we could in program mode. Okay, once you come around to that selection there, then it's automatic. So you can choose to let the camera select the AF point to use, should you wish to, in any of the modes that you use, okay, other than the automatic modes, which obviously it just defaults to doing that. Now aperture priority as well. See, I keep on wanting to go for the mode dial here. Now I've got the 60D. I think I'm getting used to it. Now aperture priority, again we can change the autofocus points, and the quick way to set the center one is hit the set button and select automatic. You can hit the set button again, and that applies to any of the modes that it lets us do this in. And also obviously manual is where I spend most of my time. You can choose the autofocus points as well. Now why would you want to choose the autofocus point to use? Well, you might want to focus on a different part of the image. You may want to focus on something that's behind a person or something that's in the foreground, in which case you're going to need to select your AF point, take control of the autofocus system, and then focus on what you want to make the image that you're trying to produce. Okay, now going through the rest of these modes, A depth, again you've got no control over this one. As we go through to off automatic, portrait mode as well, just to show some of these quickly. Okay, we can't actually choose the autofocus point. This is a bad thing in portrait mode, because the autofocus point is going to focus on the closest thing to the camera, which might be a shirt collar, a nose, someone's elbow, shoulder, something else that's in front of where their eye is, which is typically where you want to focus on a portrait. So to me, I don't know why they've not allowed you to select the autofocus point, and it's the same going through any of these automatic preset modes as well. We can choose which autofocus point to select. In sports mode you want them all active anyway, so that's fair enough. Night portrait, again we can't do it, and then we're on to flash off again. Video mode is separate, okay, we manually focus anyway in video mode. So really you want to be moving into program mode, aperture priority, shutter speed or TV priority, aperture priority, or manual mode to have full control over which autofocus point you're using. So now I'll just discuss again what autofocus needs to lock onto a subject in the next part of the video, and tips on what you can do if your camera starts to hunt to obtain focus. Okay, so remember I said earlier on in the video that the camera needs contrast to focus on. Autofocus systems are based on contrast. If you've got a solid colour wall, this could be a white wall, any kind of solid colour, there's little to no contrast in here, unless maybe you've got some detail or a join, maybe where the seams of paper or a hole in the paper, maybe somewhere where there's going to be some contrast for it to lock onto. Now I've got the camera on autofocus mode at the moment. I'm going to turn all the autofocus modes on, okay, and I know that the frame, if I just excuse me a moment, have a quick look, is filled with a wall with no detail on. Sorry for getting in front of the camera there. So if I try to focus now, okay, it's actually managed to find a little bit of detail. There you go. See, it's struggling every so often. It starts to hunt, and that's with all the autofocus points. This wall has some little bits of detail in, but if I now place my hand in front of it to make it easier, so there's plenty of contrast in there, okay, on my hand, so it's going to look at the contrast and detail to lock onto on the autofocus system. Right, nice blurry hand there. So we'll have a quick look. So now it's locking on, no problem, even as I change distance, and it's reacquiring focus there. Now obviously the centre autofocus point is the most sensitive one, so it's really quick to lock on. If I choose one of the outer points, okay, it's a little slower. See, it starts to hunt a little bit. There we go, because it's less sensitive. So it needs that contrast. Now if you're struggling focusing on something in low light, then you can try to find a point of contrast to focus on that's on the right plane of focus. So say you want to focus on somebody's eye, then you might want to focus on something on their shirt, maybe a seam or a join, where there's enough contrast for the centre AF point to lock onto, lock focus, lightly recompose, and then you can shoot, and hopefully you get the eye in focus, depending on your depth of field, of course. I will cover more on focus recompose in an upcoming video. So just remember, your AF system needs enough light and also contrast. You have no light, you have no contrast. For example, if I turn my video lights off, excuse me a moment, okay, it's going to get dark. There we go. Look, you can just see the back of the camera there. So now if I try to focus, okay, it's really struggling on that outer point. Now if I change now to the centre AF point, it might do, or it may not. See, there is not a whole lot of contrast in this scene, because as you can see, beyond the camera there is no contrast for even that centre AF point to lock onto. So in low light, sometimes you might need to go to manual focus. Killer is, you might not be able to see what you're focusing on. You can, of course, use a torch to give your camera enough contrast to lock onto as well. So that's a quick tip for you. I'll just turn the video lights back on so we can all see. There we go. Okay, so remember, you need contrast for your AF system to work. Okay, so hopefully that's given you enough tips on the autofocus points and the autofocus system. In the last section of the video, I'm just going to cover the different autofocus modes and what they are for. So we'll go to that now. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the autofocus modes now. And we're not talking the autofocus points, we're looking at the autofocus modes. I'm just going to run through what they are whilst the camera's in manual mode. Some of these modes aren't available in some of the more automatic shooting modes of the camera. The sports mode chooses its own preferred mode. Automatic, for example, if I switch the camera just back to automatic, it uses AI focus. I don't know whether you can actually see that there on the screen, which is auto intelligent focus. So it decides whether it's going to use continuous or single shot, depending on what subject is in front of it and whether that subject, well, not what subject, whether the subject in front of it is moving at all, so whether it needs to track the subject that it's trying to focus on. Now I'll just go back to manual mode, just so we can have a look at the autofocus points, and we should all know by now the way to select this is by using the AF button here, and that brings up the selection. We have one shot, AI focus and AI servo. AI servo is continuous, okay, so continuous autofocus, so the camera will, if I set that mode, let's see if I can get it to do it, all autofocus points on, and I'm just going to get it to focus on my hand, and I don't know if you can hear that, but the lens and the camera is tracking focus as I move my hand. Now the next mode, in fact we'll leave all those active. The next mode, AI focus, chooses which mode to use, so whether it be single shot or AI servo, similar to what it does in automatic mode, depending on what the camera is doing or what the subject's doing. So here it's on single shot, locks it really quickly. As I start to move, then it switches to tracking, okay, AI servo mode automatically. It could be handy if you're in a situation where your subjects are going from being still to suddenly moving, and then still, suddenly moving, so you can kind of let the camera take control there. Now the mode I use most is single shot, because I do a lot of portraiture, which is static based. Even when I've got someone moving, running or jumping, I tend to pre-focus first and then let them jump onto a mark and I shoot once I know they're going to be in focus. So one shot is, that's it, so it locks focus and that's it, it's locked. If your subject now changes distance, then you're going to blow focus. So if you move your camera or your subject moves, they're going to become out of focus. That includes whether they come closer or further away. You would need, if you've got someone who's a bit of a jittery Joe, can't stand still, then you might want to use one of the other autofocus modes, although it does kind of limit what you can do in terms of the autofocus point selection, because you get more accurate tracking in AI servo or AI focus with moving subjects if you have all of the autofocus points active. Okay, so it can at least keep or maintain focus. So that's just a quick look at the different autofocus modes and what you would use them for. Well, the AI servo mode, you use them for sports. AI focus if you've got subjects going from static to moving, static, moving. One shot is for subjects which don't move, still life, buildings, portraits and so forth as well. So hopefully this video has been some help to you. And don't forget, if you have got any questions about the Canon 500D T1i or KissX3, then you can send me an email, message on Facebook or via YouTube. Any questions or comments, stick them below. And don't forget to subscribe to New to Photo as well. Now go and check out those channels. That's New to Photo and NTP Advanced as well. So thank you very much for watching this video, guys. Video number 25, all about the autofocus system on the Canon 500D. So we now should be all set to get out there and shoot some portraits and some stuff in low light, and also some sports as well, which are going to all be upcoming videos in this series as I finish it off. So as always, thanks for your support and thanks very much for your comments and views, and I'll catch you guys soon.